In this video, we're going to be making working landmines in Minecraft that can instantly kill a fully armored player. I'm sure you've seen some of these simpler designs, but we're going to be taking it to a whole nother level. Our job in this video is to make it as dangerous as possible to cross this very unassuming grass field. In real life, landmines are meant to be deadly, but they're primarily designed to deny your enemy access to certain areas in a conflict. A basic landmine consists of a trigger mechanism, a detonating charge, and the main charge. The trigger detects a player, and the detonator ignites the surrounding explosives, which do most of the damage. This design has some problems though. The trigger mechanism is way too obvious and easy to avoid. The detonator takes way too long to ignite, making it easy to escape once the mine is triggered. And while the resulting explosion is formidable, it's nowhere near strong enough to kill a fully armored player. Let's deal with that problem first. In Minecraft, we have a ton of different explosives to choose from, and almost all of them are stronger than just TNT. TNT minecarts are my personal favorite because they're not that expensive, they're a lot more powerful, and if you stack a bunch of them and then crash them into something, they go off in a massive chain reaction. By replacing all of our TNT with just a single powered rail with a space next to it and a bunch of TNT minecarts, you can get a much more explosive result. As a plus, it detonates instantly too. Even with this change though, we're still leaving a lot of potential explosive power on the table. If you've noticed, when the minecarts detonate, they kind of launch themselves off to the side. Their momentum carries over laterally rather than upwards. This means that a lot of the explosion happens too far away from the player to do any real damage. To fix this, we can simply put a more blast resistant block right next to the rail, so that way when the minecarts detonate, they crash into the block and it concentrates the explosion upwards. With this design, if you use at least 4 minecarts, you'll probably kill any fully armored player. The detonation is about as good as it's gonna get. Now we've got to fix the trigger system. I'm no expert, but this looks pretty suspicious and I don't think people would be very eager to walk over it, especially if you had a dozen of these in a field. I mean, all you have to do is not touch it and the bomb won't go off. So instead, we're gonna do something a little bit sneaky. With something simple like this, just using rails slanted up to a sculk sensor, you can make a system that will detect any noise and trigger the bomb. One problem though, if you're actually trying to build this, there's no way to do this without setting it off. To fix this, we can just surround the sculk sensor on all sides with wool, so that way there's no sound detected unless you're directly above it. So if you really have to, you can dig down from the side to arm it or disarm it. This also makes sure that the bomb doesn't detonate unless something is directly over it. This concept can be pretty easily twisted into any type of booby trap you could imagine. Here we have a door to a very basic house, except right in front of it there's an observer facing downward onto a rail with a TNT minecart facing into obsidian. Opening the door to the house will cause an instant explosion. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but you could actually use tripwires for once with this contraption. If you hide it well, they might walk into it, but here it's pretty obvious. But when you go up to the back, there's actually an observer hooked up to the tripwire. So even if you walk up to it and break it, you die instantly. If you wanted to get really evil with it, you could rig random trees in the area to explode. So any player trying to get wood will be unpleasantly surprised. It might not be the greatest idea to waste your precious TNT minecarts on unarmed wood-gathering citizens, but it will definitely instill fear in your opponent. But going back to the task at hand, there's a very obvious issue where the sculk sensor is being set off by any passive mobs that walk by it. Obviously, we don't want to waste our landmine blowing up pigs. A system like this will be more expensive, but will only detect players. Here we're making use of a sculk sensor right above a sculk shrieker. The shrieker will only activate when the sculk sensor is activated by a player. It won't activate when the sculk sensor is activated by a passive mob or a monster or something. The observers will face into the shrieker and output a signal to the rails, which will be just enough to ignite the minecarts. Obviously, you still need the wool on either side of the sensor just to make sure you're protected, so you can dig around these areas, arm the minecart, and then leave. To make this more cost efficient, you should consider adding multiple minecart charges to every one trigger system you add. You could add anywhere up to 4 of them. This also has the added advantage of making it so that no matter which way you cross the trigger system, you're always in the blast radius of at least one of the 4 corners, effectively guaranteeing a kill if the mine goes off. With how expensive it is, you really don't want to waste this trigger system. I created this model to better explain how the mine works. The sensor activates the shrieker, which activates the observers, which activate the minecarts. In the center red zone, making any noise will get you killed, including breaking the blocks on the floor. In the orange zone, you can now break and place blocks, but moving or making any noise above the surface surface will set off the trap. In the yellow zone, the likelihood that the trap goes off is very low. However, if you eat or trigger a noise up above a certain level, the trap will still go off. This is because if you jump, you'll be making a noise still within the line of sight of the sensor. Lastly, in the green zone, you're pretty much safe. You can do just about anything you want as long as you don't make any noise within that region. One issue though, there's some pretty easy ways to defuse these mines if you know what to expect. If you have even the slightest suspicion that there could be a landmine somewhere, just throw a snowball. Odds are you'll be able to find it and set it off. This works because any player thrown objects still count as a player made noise. This means that something as simple as an egg can make our trap useless. Somehow, we need to design a system that can distinguish between different sounds and only activate when a player is actually walking over it. We're not out of luck just yet though. There's some obscure game mechanics we can make use of to make this happen. Some blocks when hooked up to a comparator will output a different signal depending on how full they are. Calibrated sculk sensors will take a redstone input between 1 and 15 as instructions to only listen for one type of sound. The easiest way to display this is with a lectern. Here we can see we're on page 2 of a book, so the redstone signal out of the lectern is 2. This means that the sensor only detects players jumping. A signal strength of 3 will not detect walking or jumping, but it'll detect eating or using any item. You can check out the Minecraft wiki to see which signals correspond with which sounds. To improve our trap, we'll use a signal strength of 1 to only detect player movement. To make this cheaper, we can replace the lectern with a composter that has exactly 1 leaf block inside of it. With a design like this, we can make a trigger system that is only activated by walking noises and only when they are made by an actual player. It uses a very similar system to our previous design where the sculk sensor activates a sculk shrieker and then it sends off the minecarts through an observer. This time though, it's a calibrated sculk sensor and you can see the purple side of it just pointing in that direction there. And on the other side of this block, we have a composter with 1 leaf block inside of it and a repeater facing into the block. We surround it on all sides by wool because if not, you'd be able to detect sounds all the way over here because the calibrated sculk sensor has a much greater range than a normal sculk sensor. Surrounding it on all sides with wool and leaving the top open makes sure that it only goes off if players walk on these few blocks up here. And as we were hoping, you can't set it off with projectiles anymore. Obviously, there's some drawbacks to this design. It's much more expensive using a lot more wool, calibrated sculk sensor, and the redstone components. On top of that, all of this stuff gets put a lot lower below ground, so it would take a lot more time to build. Instead of clearing out a whole 3 blocks deep like in this design requires you dig 7 blocks deep. That makes this design just not at all practical. After a couple more hours of work, I managed to refine this down into this design. The hardest part was figuring out how to power the sculk sensor without accidentally powering the minecarts. I'm embarrassed by how long it took me to come up with this solution, but I ended up just offsetting the composter and comparator into the side of the block over here, and what I didn't realize is that powering this block here doesn't actually power the rail, only powering this block and that block does. This way we can compact it into a 3 block deep design that isn't even that much more expensive to build. And as you can see, the detection range is about the same as our original. I'm pretty happy with this landmine, so now I'm going to show you how you guys can build it for yourself. You're going to want to start by digging a 3 block deep hole like this, where you have a 3x3 square in the center and a trench going out 2 blocks in each direction. In the center, we'll put the sculk shrieker and surround it on all sides with observers. Then we'll take the powered rails and slope them off of each of these like so, and remove the ones on top of the observer. Then you can surround them with wool, put a sculk sensor in the center. Don't forget to put obsidian at the end of each trench like this. Now we're going to want to cover this section, and this is where the job gets dangerous. Without making any noise, you don't want to stand up or do anything that might set off the trap. You're going to want to go around and put 4 TNT minecarts on each track and cover up the holes. Now we have a fully functioning land. To make this into our upgraded version is really simple. All you have to do is replace the sculk sensor with a calibrated sculk sensor. Pay attention to which block the purple end points into, and in any direction, it doesn't really matter. You can dig out a few more blocks, place a comparator facing into the block, a composter, and put 1 oak leaf inside of it. This one is also a lot less dangerous to arm because placing blocks won't set it off. All you have to do is be careful not to stand up and walk around while you're placing the TNT minecarts. Now our landmine is immune to common defusal methods, but will still go off if you walk over it. Now we just need to figure out where to put these mines. I've found it's best to place them around 16 blocks from the center of each mine. You can put them closer if you want, but you'll have a higher risk of a chain reaction. You should also avoid a grid pattern to deny a straight path through the field. Now, this field is basically impossible to cross. That's all for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.